So I'm super, super excited about your trip to Portugal for you. That is going to be so good.
Me too. Thank you. I'm very excited. First
That'll be fun.
time uh, international.
Really,
Hello,
that's cool.
everybody. Just want to say good afternoon real quick. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. We are going to give this a few more minutes. We'll start after the hour here, but settle in, grab your coffee or your lunch, and hang out, and we'll get started soon.
Awesome. Did
Love
you
it.
check what's playing on in-flight entertainment yet?
I did not know.
Okay. I it's one of my favorite things when I fly to Europe because I can never really fall asleep on the
Mhm.
trip over there, even if I take a gummy or some other sort of it doesn't work. So I end up binge watching Marvel movies.
Nice.
I'm
Nice.
really hoping that Superman or Fantastic Four First Steps is playing because I'm like, okay, I can watch that, and the last eight episodes of, and just like that before I land, and then I'll
So
be
true.
totally in the mood for vacation.
I love it. That's exactly how I spend all of my like travel time. It's like if I'm on a plane, it's like during the day, it's like I
Yeah,
gotta watch a Marvel movie. That's when I catch up on all the films. It's like there's a
exactly.
lot of them and it's easy to fall behind in the day to day. So it's like what's new? What's available?
Ross, did you watch Fantastic Four yet?
I did. I went with my mom, funny enough. She
Oh,
called me
that's
up and she was
awesome.
like, "Do you want to go to a movie like back in the day?" I was like, I can't say no. Like, imagine if what
Oh,
kind of son would that be? So I was like, "Yes, mom, I want to. Let's do it." So we went. I went, and it was great. It was great. I thought it was good.
okay, very cool. And had you seen the other three Fantastic Four movies that have been made?
I have not.
Okay, so I was going to ask you how this compares
I
to
have
the
not.
Jessica Alba version or
Mm,
the, oh golly, I forget her name, but Miles Teller was in
okay.
that one, and that one didn't do all that well box office wise. And then there
Interesting.
was one that was made, I think, in 1994 that was never released,
Oh wow.
but there are like
That's
stealth cameos in Fantastic Four of all the four who were
hmm.
in that never released movie. So,
That's cool. It's interesting. I have two interesting points on this. One, I heard that it's better because they don't take you back into the like origin stories and they just like get right into the plot, which I think
okay.
they have also said they did with Superman, which made it a better movie because everybody has heard that before.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
and then random fact is I had a Superman podcast back in the day where I took all of the old Superman is I believe 100 years old or something like that. And because it's so old, there's this Creative Commons license associated with like the radio stuff. So we redid all of that and I brought in like a music producer to recreate all of the original soundtracks but with modern media, and it was a fun project, during the COVID times when there's nothing to do and you can't leave the house, that type of stuff. So it was fun.
Oh, see, that's so much more productive than me. I managed to kill like I think I killed a dozen sourdough starters during the pandemic.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. Looks like we've
Oh,
got a few comic book fans in the house, which is cool to see.
oh, someone said, is that Broderick?
Yes.
You are
Yes.
saying that the Superman 2025 is the canonical, that is the one that should go down in history?
I think so.
I thought
That
they did a great job. It
You've
felt
seen
like
it?
a comic book.
That's
That
cool.
was the thing I liked about it most. So yeah, it was
Interesting.
good.
We've got a
I
lot of folks on here. Everyone, if you have the chat, can you just drop in the chat one of two things, either where you're based or what your favorite comic book is? I'd love to know who we have joining us today before we get this started, which will be very soon. But
very soon.
Yeah, fun way to
Thanks,
kick things off.
everyone. This is, I'm scrolling through the list of people who are here. Everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to attend our
nice.
webinar today. This is awesome.
We've got Brian, big fan of X-Men. I like it.
Yes, X-Men.
Megan, Birds of Prey, DC. That's a niche. I have to check that one out. I have not heard of that. Nightwing, great one, Will. That's a good
Oh,
call.
Nightwing. Did anyone else watch the live action version of the Titans?
I
Because
did
that ran for like four seasons, and Nightwing was one of the characters.
very cool. I did not. I did not. There's a few Nightwing comments. Okay, I definitely have to check this out.
The
Paper
Watchmen
Girls
always
from
count.
Sylvia. I've never heard of Paper Girls either. Christian with the classic of Spider-Man. curious if it's like the modern Spider-Man or the old one.
Oh yeah, well, okay, the Titans show was bad, but in one of those sort of like kitschy sort of ways, I'm like, oh, this is so horrible. I need to watch the next episode, and I just binged through all of it.
I like
Oh, good times.
that's funny.
Facts.
Rat Queens, non-superhero comic. Okay, Megan, I see you. I'm gonna check that out as well.
Oh, you didn't like the way they did Donna Troy. Yeah, that was an interesting. I thought the casting was good, but I thought that they ended her story arc way too early.
Oh, Nightwing is about grown-up Robin. Very cool. I like it.
Yeah, and in the Titans version, Ross, you will find out that he has a love-hate relationship with Batman.
Oh,
But I mean,
yes.
it's kind of hard not to, right?
That's fair. That is fair. That is fair. I get it. 100%. And Daniel from California. We've got Jennifer from Nashville. Awesome. Lots of Boston's in the house too. I like it. We've got the whole state covered. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, Pullman, Washington. Awesome. Hi, Sue. New Jersey. Hello. Hello,
Love
hello.
it. From East
Oh,
Coast to
boy.
West Coast, we're covering it all. I love it.
All right. Well, it looks like we've got plenty of people filing in, so I think let's get this thing started.
Let's do it.
All right, let's rock and roll. Zach, tag, you're it.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Zach Bierger. I'm the AVP of Marketing at Carnegie here. And thanks again for joining us for today's webinar, Story, System, and Scale, the Future of Content in the Age of AI. So before we get started, I just want to do a couple of quick housekeeping items to cover. So for today's webinar, this will last about 45 minutes with an additional 15 minutes reserved for Q&A at the end. If you have a question, please use the Zoom control panel's Q&A feature, and we'll answer as many of those questions as time allows at the end. We've also opened up the Zoom chat room, as you can tell. Thanks everybody for jumping in and telling us where you're from and your favorite comic book movies and all that. That's awesome. Just so you know, closed caption is enabled for those who want captions. You can turn that on via your personal Zoom settings in the bottom control bar. And this webinar is being recorded and will be shared along with the slide deck in the next few days. So just watch your email and we'll send you a note when the content is available. And then finally, please help us by filling out the quick post-webinar survey. You'll receive a follow-up email encouraging you to submit the survey shortly after we conclude today's session. So that'd be much appreciated. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. Tag, Ross, you're it.
I'll take it. So, hey, everybody. I know I asked a lot of people to share their favorite comic, but I didn't share mine. So, I'm a big fan of a niche comic that probably not a lot of people have heard of. And if you have, then you're my kind of person. It's called Comet Man. I think they only ran 2 series. It was a Marvel comic. It was very, very niche, but I loved it and I wish they would have extended it. But Comet Man was my favorite. I'm the CEO of a company called Foundation, which is a partner of Carnegie for the last year and a bit now, where we've been helping higher ed institutions build up their content marketing engines and drive traffic through organic, through generative engine optimization, distribution, and more. Super excited to be here with Volt. And Volt, I'll allow you to be tagged now and share a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Ross. Hello, everyone. I'm Voltaire. Everyone calls me Volt. I am the EVP for Web and Creative at Carnegie. Before coming to Carnegie about 4 years ago, I was the co-founder and CEO of M. Stoner. We were a digital-first agency that spent roughly 2 decades building websites for more than 300 institutions across the country and around the world. As far as comics go, I fall back on the classic X-Men, and it breaks my heart that they have never, ever, ever been able to do the Dark Phoenix saga proper justice. So, y'all, we have got a lot to go over today. 40 minutes, 45 minutes is going to fly. And our goal is to help you through this webinar to unlock the power of storytelling at scale in service to achieving your objectives. Golly, I've had a lot of coffee, y'all. Forgive me. So for some of you on this webinar, those objectives might include building your brand or raising your awareness and your prestige. For others, it'll be recruiting students, increasing loyalty and pride among alumni, inspiring donors to give or to give more, maybe galvanizing your internal community or igniting positive change in your organization. And I'm here to tell you that story can serve all of these purposes. So we've got 5 parts to today's webinar. We're going to start by talking about why story always wins. We'll then move into content atomization, basically going from one story to 100 assets. We'll talk about how to unlock that story at scale, how to distribute it, and then make sure that we have a little bit of time for questions and answers. So let's get started. So the ultimate advantage, why story always wins. Now, anyone who's been to one of my storytelling webinars will know that one of the first things I will do is recommend the book by Jonathan Gottschall, The Storytelling Animal, How Stories Make Us Human. He has this wonderful quote in the book that talks about the fact that story teaches us facts about the world, it influences our moral logic, and it marks us with fears, hopes, and anxieties that alter our behavior, perhaps even our personalities. Now, when we talk about story, typically, I think most of us think about stories providing pleasure. Stories can instill a sense of contentment, satisfaction, and pleasure in our lives. And if that is all that story did for us, frankly, that would be more than enough, because who doesn't need more contentment, satisfaction, pleasure, and joy in their lives, right? But story has 7 more functions that serve us as individuals and as communities. So the second purpose of story is to solve problems. It's often through reading or hearing stories of others solving problems that we find the strength and insight to solve our own. Now, I don't know how many of you have followed Oprah through the years, but I'm a Chicago boy. I've been here for about 55 years. Oprah got her start in Chicago. Harper Studios was based actually about 15 minutes away from me. And there was this one episode that I think of all the time. It was after Oprah had lost all that weight again, and she was auctioning off her clothing. And there was this one woman who called in and said, "Oprah, I bought a pair of your shoes." And Oprah asked why. And she said, "Well, you have shared so much about your life over these years, and you've inspired me. And every time things get really, really hard, I just basically step into your shoes and I say to myself, if Oprah did it, so can I." So stories are really amazing for helping us to solve problems through the lens of what other people have done. Stories also help us to assimilate, to adapt to new situations. So I've got a story about this. I was speaking at a conference in Philadelphia maybe a couple of years ago, and I've got my sort of routine when I go to a conference. I basically pick a hotel that has a nice bar and a full service restaurant. I go downstairs, put on my headphones, I order a burger and a glass of wine, and I just chill out the night before. So I was going about my routine, and suddenly a guy sits next to me at the bar, and I'm like, "Oh, no, no, you didn't get the script on this. No one's supposed to talk to me while I'm here." But he's like, "So what are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I'm speaking at a conference." And he's like, "Oh, what are you speaking on?" And I said, "Storytelling." And then he said to me, I just retired as the global head of HR for AT&T, and I've got to tell you that we use stories every day to help our newest recruits assimilate into the organization," which I thought was really, really cool. Stories help impart traditions. They help us to pass values, rituals, and meaning from one generation to the next. Stories also teach us new skills through examples and positive reinforcement. Anyone who has gone through an MBA program knows this, because the MBA program, at least the one I went to, was all HBR, Harvard Business Review case studies. You got a 2-page case study, they give you the scenario, they ask you a bunch of questions, and then they tell you what really happened. And I remember our capstone case study was about International Harvester, and about a new CEO who was facing some headwinds from unions. And of course, all of us who are newly minted MBAs or soon to be minted MBAs were like, "Of course you don't give in. You hold fast to your plan and your strategy. You don't capitulate." And then we found out what the punchline was. And indeed, the CEO held his ground. He did not capitulate. He did not give in to the unions. And as a result, he basically tanked the company. And that was pretty much the end of International Harvester as we knew it. So stories can teach us through the examples of others. Stories can provide pattern and order and structure. Our brains are wired for pattern and order. and we seek pattern and order. And in the face of the lack of detail, and I got this from my executive coach one day, in the face of a lack of detail, we will construct stories around the facts that we have. And what she said to me specifically was, Volt, in the face of lack of information, our minds will run to the worst possible scenarios. Can I get an amen? I mean, anyone else feel this?
Amen.
This is right, right, Ross? So if
Amen.
we don't have a story, then we will create one because we need one. Stories help us to connect. They help us to understand similarities and accept differences between individual people, communities, countries, and cultures. And then finally, stories define us. Stories are a way that we define ourselves, both for ourselves and for others. Now, there was this great HBR snippet that fell into my mailbox a couple of years ago, and it was talking about moving from territorial to collaborative leadership. And one of the things that they said was you need to build a sense of self-awareness. And I quote, start by deconstructing why you feel the need to be competitive or territorial. What story are you telling yourself about your colleagues and your organization? Once you understand the assumptions underlying your behavior, you can begin to challenge them. So I want to finish this section with this really great quote from Paul Zak. A compelling story with an emotional trigger alters our brain chemistry. It makes us more trusting, more understanding, and more open to ideas. It's a really, really great quote that becomes even more important when you take a look at what Paul Zak does for a living. He is a professor of economic sciences, and he is the director for the Center of Neuroeconomic Studies at Claremont-Grade University. Some of you might know what neuroeconomics is, but for those of you who don't, neuroeconomics is the combination of economics, neuroscience, and psychology. And what Paul Zak does is he studies how people make economic decisions, and he specializes in the use of stories and immersive experiences to impact consumer behavior and help economies to thrive. So when you realize that someone is taking story and using it to drive economic trends at the macro level, you realize just how important and how powerful story really is. And tagging on that, I'm going to pass it off to Ross. Ross, tag, you're it again.
I love it. Volt, I think it's a perfect way to start because stories fundamentally, as you said, shape who we are as people. It shapes the way that we think. It shapes the way we act. And stories are kind of even what we started this entire conversation of, even though it was a sidetrack where we were discussing comics. And what are those? They're just stories. Stories that we may have fell in love with when we were kids. Some of us fell in love with when we were older, but they're still at the core just a story. And one of the organizations that has done storytelling ridiculously well, which you will all see on this slide, is Disney. Disney, since the beginning, has perfected and crafted and understood the value of telling stories. Stories that connect with us on an emotional level, on a fundamental level, where we can be lured away into the stories of ancient texts that are then modernized into brand new stories. We can also take inspiration and insight from Disney in the way that they took literally, and I don't know if anybody from Disney's here, so no shade, but like we can all say there's a lot of those films that were essentially just like Shakespeare stories with lions thrown in the mix, or Shakespeare stories where they took ideas of like Pocahontas and Avatar, all of those different things, right? Like that is at the core of so many of the stories that we have all grown up to love and care about. But one of the things that they do ridiculously well, beyond just the story, is the way in which those stories are distributed, the way in which those stories are spread, right? The way that Disney thinks about their story isn't just in the idea that you create a story once and you launch it and you call it quits. The way in which they think about a story should be the exact same way that all of you are thinking about the stories that you're producing all the time. You don't just press publish on one story about a great alumni. You don't just allow one individual who is doing some great things on campus, making an impact in the world. You press publish on it and then you say, what is the next thing? You think about the stories that make up your brand's story, your narrative, your vision, your goals, everything that embodies the historical and the future message that you want to convey. And then you ask yourself, how can we distribute this? How can we spread this? How can we turn one single asset, one single story into a bunch of other stories? And this is what Disney has done so well. For you internally, you might be thinking, okay, how do we do this today? It's very likely that you press publish on a piece of content, it goes live, and then you hope and wait for people to show up. In an ideal world, you're pressing publish on a piece of content the same way that Disney would press publish on a story. And instead of hoping that people find it, you start the engine immediately. You might create content for LinkedIn, you might create content for Instagram, you might create short videos, you might start to create email newsletters, or you take it a step further, which you'll see on this next slide, which is any asset that you produce needs to be considered truly that, an asset. And I say that word with intention because in marketing and content and storytelling, every time that you press publish on a video, a blog post, an infographic, or whatever it is that you are producing to tell your story, that is an asset that you should be trying to capture more ROI from for a very long time. And again, to go back to that Disney comparison, Disney has done this well. Think about how many times they have relaunched Lion King. Think about what number Toy Story we're on. I think we're on the third Frozen already, and I still have the first Frozen soundtrack stuck in my head, but they're constantly still evolving with the same stories, just different ways, right? So with you and your organization, your brand, your business, your marketing team, I would challenge you right now to look back at the last, let's say 12 months and ask yourself, what stories did we produce that really resonated with potential students, that really resonated with stakeholders, that really resonated with our target audience? And what did we do with it 2 months later, 3 months later, 4 months later, or even a week later? It's likely that you got into a habit that so many of us have gotten into, where we press publish and then we get on this wheel of what's next, what do I create next, instead of thinking maybe I could take this video that we produced and we spent a lot of budget to produce and write a blog post about it. Maybe we should reshare that on Facebook or on LinkedIn or Instagram, because you know the people who follow you in September aren't the same people who follow you in February, and they're different people. There's new people. All of those things are what you should be considering, so the assets and the things that you're producing don't collect dust, right? You want to embrace the idea of creating content that can be used to create more content, which can be used to create more content, right? If you are producing any asset that does well, I want to encourage you to not just sit there and let that piece exist in a solo instance, but ask yourself and try to create an engine where maybe that long forming asset actually becomes a webinar, becomes shorter articles, and you start to think of ways that you can get more out of the things that you've produced. Some of you right now are sitting on ideas, on topics, on stories that you might have created 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that when they went live, the crowd went wild. Everybody was applauding. Your DMs were getting a bunch of buzz. You started to see emails. Everyone loved it, but you haven't done anything with it again. And I want to encourage you to take a page out of Disney's book. Don't be afraid to remix and repurpose your greatest hits. And that's what Disney does time and time again. You look at Dumbo and you can see a movie that was produced, I think, for the very first time in maybe the 1950s. You look at Lion King, it was created in the 90s, Aladdin, 90s, Toy Story, it keeps coming over and over again. And every time these remakes hit the market, they were in the top 10 in the box office. Folks, you have the ability to replay your greatest hits and have a similar impact, but you have to be okay with a simple concept and a simple idea. And that is this: create valuable content once and then be committed to distributing it forever, and let AI support you along the way. And we're going to be talking about that as well as we go through it. Let's keep going.
Awesome. Next up, the AI supercharger, unlocking story and system at scale. So let's start with talking about AI for story discovery. What I'd really like to do is just ground this portion of the webinar in four basic philosophies that hopefully as far as I'm concerned, I love AI. I use AI all the time, but I also believe that humans need to stay at the center of our own stories. And so these are the philosophies that we use when we approach AI's wonderful technology. First guiding philosophy is storytelling is a deeply human experience. It's created by humans for humans. The second philosophy is that the advent of AI-driven technology doesn't alter the essence of story at all. Story is story is story. And when you take a look at the way that stories are told, you realize that the same sort of form, the same sort of arc has existed from the beginning of spoken word about how stories are communicated. Third guiding philosophy is that good stories are anchored in truth, and great stories come to life through the details that make our stories our own. Final philosophy, we serve ourselves best when we employ AI as a tool, not a toy, not a threat, to make us better storytellers. So let's talk a little bit about how that gets um, operationalized. This is a blank screen. All of you who write know how painful and frightening a blank screen is, particularly when the screen was not supposed to be blank. So it's a really interesting anecdote. I did a storytelling workshop for the admissions team of a local university about a month ago. And at the end of the workshop, I asked one person, so what was your greatest takeaway? What did you learn most about this? And she said, I tell stories all the time, but I realize that in those stories, nothing actually changes. And one of the wonderful things in which AI can help you is to get beyond that blank page, go beyond the facts or the anecdote, and craft a story in which there's conflict and when there's transformation. Because conflict and transformation work together in a story to capture imaginations and inspire action. So three practical things to think about. Use AI first to help you define the story hidden in the facts. Your interview, your conversations, the data points that you collect about any particular topic, any particular person, that is the foundation. The human conversation and that due diligence provide the details that are important for creating a story. Now, sometimes you get all of that stuff and you're like, where's the story in this? And you feel like you just have to like narrate blow by blow by blow, and it becomes less of a story and more of a news article. So you can basically use AI to take that transcript, take those data points, and find out what the conflict or challenge is in the story. Find out where the transformation could be. You can basically use this prompt that I've got on screen, analyze this interview, identify the core transformation, what was the conflict, pinpoint the exact moment that feels like the turning point, pull out 3 to 5 quotes that best capture the emotional arc of the story. And in terms of tools, think about using Otter AI or Fireflies for fantastic, really great fidelity transcripts. There are other tools out there that are honestly just not as good. And if you really need great transcripts, then check out Rev for human-powered and human-assisted transcripts. I prefer Fireflies myself. I find that Otter's summaries are not as good as Fireflies. Fireflies is just a little bit more accurate. All right. Number two, ask AI to represent a member of your audience and ask how your story plays. So part of this is really based on understanding who you are trying to reach. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a bit when we talk about stories at scale. But when you understand not just the demographics, but the psychographics, the attitudes, the values, the beliefs, the personality, the lifestyle, those things that actually drive decision making, then you can calibrate your story to match up with what people are needing or wanting to hear. Got a prompt here. You are blank. Read the story I'm about to share. Tell me, does this feel authentic? Where does the story connect with your challenges or your aspirations? Was there anything that didn't feel like it was authentic? And ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude are all great tools. Finally, use AI's linguistic prowess to fine-tune your prose. You've got a story that works, but now you can use AI to help you to edit that story down, to streamline, to strip out all the stuff that sounded really cool, but then you realize you put it there because you fell in love with it and you really need to kill that darling in order for the story to be better. Um, so, true confession, I went to school at Medill undergrad, Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern. And when I was there, it was the #1 school in the country for journalism. And I went through 2 painful years of having professors take my material and cross out almost every single thing that I wrote. And I remember for the first 3 weeks, maybe 5 words would stay, and everything else would be rewrite, rewrite, rewrite. So I feel really, really good about how well I write until Grammarly catches up with me. And then I'll look at Grammarly's edits and I'm like, doggone it, that's actually better sometimes. So AI for discovery, AI for hyper personalization. So those of you who get our newsletter at Carnegie will find out that we have our final report in our summer research series on personality and storytelling. It is an awesome report. Sign up for this, the newsletter. Find this on our website or in the resources section later on in this webinar if you haven't gotten this already. But let me tease 3 things. Audience psychographics are a critical part of decision making. And knowing more about who you are as an institution and who your audiences are individually will go a long way. Number 2, infusing personality into communications is a powerful way to reach beyond the facts and reach audiences on a personal level. When we say personality, we're not just talking about, hi, I've got personality like this shirt, which I am still not sure I should have worn. But we're talking about the archetype methodology that Carnegie has that helps to distill brand personalities for institutions. Third thing, strongest predictor of resonance in our testing was when messaging aligned with the respondent's personality profile. Personalized storytelling tailored to an individual's psychographics is incredibly powerful and a strong predictor of engagement. So check out this report. There's a lot more great data in there, but I wanted to share those 3 takeaways. And then 2 things as we talk about hyper-personalization. Number 1, frame the narrative to match the core values of your audience. Once you've defined your audiences, not demographically, not in terms of where they live, how much money they make, but in terms of what their values are, what their mindset is, what their aspirations are, then you can start to take a core story and translate that or reframe it in ways that are going to be more resonant for each of your audiences. Now, frankly, we do a lot of psychographic-based communications. And I will tell you that after a while, trying to come up with 5 different ways to say one thing gets really, really hard. And that's where AI is wonderful, because it does not have the creative fatigue that we have. We start by creating the core story, provide all the facts, and then AI can help us to fine-tune those stories for the people we're trying to reach. Many CRMs are already building this generative AI capability into their system. I want to tease the fact that Carnegie is developing its own content generation tool that will help people to fine-tune segmented communications based on their brand personality and based on the psychographics of their audiences. So stay tuned for more details on that. And then finally, second thing, adapt your format and channel strategy to match your audience's lifestyle. So great quote from Wayne Gretzky, skate to where the puck is headed. So psychographics can tell you where your information or where your story is going to get the most play based on the behaviors of each of your audiences. Got a prompt here that you'll get in the deck. And then in terms of tools, I mean, you can find a lot of tools online now that can help you to take a piece of content and reframe it or reformat it. Canva has a magic switch option, for instance, that uses AI to take a piece of content and reframe it in a number of different formats. So Ross and I are actually going to do, oh, there's so much to unpack here. So Ross and I are going to do a follow-up webinar on psychographics, AI, and personalization and content marketing. So stay tuned for that. But I'm going to turn this to Ross to talk about AI for content elevation.
I like it. And speaking of elevation, I think when it comes to the shirt decision, it was an elevated decision for us to both wear the bright colors of the shirt. So now we're going to talk about how you folks can elevate some of the content that you may have been producing over the years. You might be sitting on content gold, but some of you might be sitting on content debt. And what content debt is, it really is going back to that philosophy that I shared earlier around when you produce all of these stories and you're viewing them as an asset. Some of those assets can drag you down. Some of these assets might just exist but not be generating any results. And there's 4 types of optimizations that Carnegie and Foundation have been working together on with a lot of our partners. And that is this: search engine optimization. Yes, SEO seems like every day you're seeing a new article saying that search engine optimization is dead. It is far from dead, because in many ways it is a part of the overarching equation for a great marketing engine. Quality and trust optimization, making sure that your content can be high quality still, that it's not outdated, that it doesn't have a bunch of 404 links, and that it is still a trustworthy asset when somebody consumes it. 3, conversion rate optimization. If someone is visiting a page or visiting a story and consuming it, we want to optimize that so they're more likely to give you their email, they're more likely to download something, they're more likely to inquire. And then final, 4th, generative engine optimization, which is something new and we'll talk about a little bit more later on. But it's the idea of there are things that you can do today to make sure that your website, your content, your stories are influencing and showing up more frequently in the LLMs. So let's take your content library. You're going to look at it. You're going to look at all of the pieces that you've produced, and you're going to start looking for things that are worth updating, content that is worth optimizing. What content is driving the most traffic? What content is influencing the LLMs? What content is driving more inquiries? And what content is aligned with your brand? These are the things that you are going to look for. And when you find those stories that are resonating and you find those stories that are generating results, you're going to see signals. And one signal that a lot of people overlook is social referral traffic. It also matters because it shows you that there is a story that people actually like, a story that someone thought was worth passing to someone else that they knew that they cared. If I take an asset and I share it on Facebook, if I share it on Instagram, if I share it on LinkedIn, it's because I am connecting with that story. I might be trying to strengthen a relationship with people I'm connected to, but that story that you told and that you produced is one worth sharing. So you want to take into consideration all of these signals, all of this data, and then you build the next piece, which is a framework around how you are going to prioritize the optimization of the things that you have already produced. You have a content library filled with great stories. Some of those stories might be from 2020. Some of them might be from 2024. But if they have the right signals, you want to prioritize those as category 1 that you want to focus on getting your editorial team to elevate, to optimize it for search, to optimize it for conversions, to optimize it for GEO, for all of these things. And you might need to pair it with a strategist, someone who can think strategically about all of the things that we're talking about, a writer who really understands the message, the story, your brand, your value, and then of course a subject matter expert who knows the entity, who knows the story and the message that is being shared. And then it goes off to the upload QA team. Folks, I wanted to share with you an internal elevation checklist that we use. Screenshot this, steal this, circulate it with your team. The same way that Disney steals ideas, I am giving you full permission to steal this one from us. This is the checklist that you should take to optimize your content for better outcomes in the AI era. I'm not going to go through each one of these because we still have a lot of slides to go through, but I want to tell you, if you do this time and time again with your old assets, you will increase the likelihood of your assets not only showing up in search, but influencing the LLMs. Let's talk about the outcomes of this type of effort. Well, we all know that students land on typically higher ed websites through search. Now, search has changed. Discoverability is no longer just through Google, Bing, all of those tools. People are discovering your site more and more frequently through LLMs, through Perplexity, through Claude, through ChatGPT, and more. But it's still a discovery mechanism. So when you start to produce these stories and you create more on your website, what happens? On the next slide, you'll see what the outcome can look like. More and more people visiting your site, more entry points for people to visit your site. The more stories that you produce that are high value, that speak to all of the things that Volt talked about, folks, you are going to have so many new entry points to connect with humans in a way that resonates with them. Every single story needs to have that in it. Every blog post, every press release, every journal, every asset, every video, every Instagram story, all of the stories that you produce can generate organic traffic. And you might say, well, we can't pay tuition with traffic. I hear you. But that traffic has a value. And if you haven't done the work to figure out the value, then get in touch. We'd be happy to talk you through this. But essentially, the way that you think about this is simple. How much value would you spend typically on a Google ad to capture that traffic? You multiply that by the number of visitors. You take your average CPC, you multiply it by the traffic that you are generating organically for those queries, for that discovery, and that's the value of a story. And that is the ROI of storytelling in the AI age. When you throw in LLMs, you see even more visibility, you see more opportunities to do exactly what many of these brands are doing. And you look at these traffic numbers and you might be like, okay, but that doesn't work in our space. These are actual clients, higher ed institutions generating hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of traffic every single month through content. All right. So when you start to lead with that methodology of content, media, and storytelling, you start to build up an organic content engine that can thrive for years to come. And the reality is people aren't getting offline. Like people aren't going offline. More and more, the vast majority of the world still isn't online. So this can only go one way. And the work that you do today, the work that you invest in today to build that strong foundation is going to pay dividends for years to come. And this is the beauty of storytelling, content, and distribution. All right. So the next one, I want to talk about AI for intelligent distribution. And this is one of my favorite topics, one of my favorite stories, one of my favorite concepts, because I am obsessed with frameworks. And this framework is around uncovering content market fit. What is content market fit? Content market fit is the simple idea that you have an audience that you're trying to resonate with. People who you care about, people whose story, who would resonate with your story, people that you want to connect with, but you have to have content that resonates with them. So when Volt's talking about understanding the psychographics of a persona, what we're talking about is the exact same thing. Content market fit is when a story resonates with the people that you want to connect with, and you can tell that story truly forever because you know that it is always going to resonate with them. This is why you can tell me as an adult the story of Aladdin and I will sing a whole new world every day because that story still resonates with me, right? Because it is a good story. And you have some of those too. So let's talk through what this looks like so it doesn't seem like it's just like a vague idea. All right, the first part of it is research. You need to start with research. On the research side, if you go to the next slide, we'll focus in on this area. You'll see that it really starts with finding the channels that influence your audience. Where is your audience spending time? I don't want everyone to get all excited and say, oh, I heard Ross talk about all of this stuff in GEO. We need to be on TikTok. We need to be on YouTube, Reddit, Facebook, Quora, Pinterest, LinkedIn, all of the channels. My dad told me from a very young age, Ross, it's better to be have one good kid than two bad. And I think the same thing applies with social media and all of these channels, folks. It's better to be really good on one of these channels, be excellent before you start jumping into others. But I want you to take the time to understand what channels are your audience on. And then you have to see what content they care about on those channels. Then you need to understand how they're responding to it. But when it comes to that channel user fit piece, you're really starting to go straight through that methodology. You're asking what questions, what channels influence these individuals, what goes well, right? The timeline for this on the next slide, you'll see it breaks down 1 to 4 days for you to really figure out how much influence do different channels have. You're going to measure things like activity, how many people are doing it, how many subscribers, how many followers. And then once you've gone through this methodology, you start to rethink. And this is content user fit. On the next slide, you'll see where we talk about finding the content that this audience wants the most. Sometimes I like to say that I go into this whole concept, this secondary persona that I like to call the Sherlock homeboy method, where I try to reverse engineer what content people actually care about. So I'll go on Reddit, I'll go on Instagram, and I'll see what content has the most likes, what content has the most shares, most upvotes, most comments, most press, and then I'll use that to understand what type of content users want, what type of content your audience wants. And when you start to see these signals, you can realize that you can remix that for your own space. Because if somebody in cybersecurity cares about a certain format where it's maybe a day in the life of a cybersecurity pro, maybe in someone who's working to become an accountant in that niche, in that business school, they want to also see content on a day in the life of being an accountant, right? Now that you have content user fit, now you go to your market, which is the final piece of this. And you start to remix these stories time and time again so they resonate with your audience and they connect with your audience on a regular basis. This takes time. This isn't something that happens quickly. This is something that takes time. You have to test the stories, measure the stories, and you create a content engine around the concepts that you're producing and that you're telling on a regular basis. And then, of course, the last step is you have to measure it. We don't do things just for the sake of doing them. We want to understand the metrics. We want to measure the ROI. We want to understand the results. We want to understand all of that. And that's the final piece. Folks, I'm going to wrap up this section with another distribution playbook. And I want to bring it all back to where we started. I've said it a lot, but I'll say it one more time. You have to embrace the idea of taking inspiration from Disney. They have done it ridiculously well. So when you go off and you're done listening to us talk today, and you're thinking about how can I get my stories out there, I don't want you to go back into old habits. I want you to ask yourself truly, how can we take these stories that we're producing, understand whether or not the stories are worth telling, first and foremost, press publish on them, optimize them, and then start to think through this methodology. Can these assets that are being published on your domain show up in new ways? And there's one reason why more than ever, this slide, this idea should kind of shake you in some ways to say, maybe I do need to change the way that I think. And it's because of the new age of discoverability. And that is generative engine optimization, AI, SEO, however you want to call it. But it's this new age, which is this framework here, where on the left, you get a quick insight around what goes into generative engine optimization. It's a methodology that Carnegie and Foundation are working to kind of really wrap our heads around completely. But this is the methodology that we're thinking through. On one end, you have the data layer. And this is the stuff behind the scenes, your tech stack. There's an experimentation happening with things like LLMs.txt files, robots.txt files, making sure your sitemap is up. You need to make sure that your website infrastructure is set up to be crawled by the bots. You should also understand the data around how many people are using prompts every single day to make decisions associated with your programs. This is where you use tools like Profound, Ahrefs, SEMrush, AI Toolkit, all of these tools to understand the LLMs. Then you need to understand how queries work. Folks, if anyone here today went to their LLM and they said, what is the best university to get a degree in marketing? You are going to all receive a very different response. Why? Because the LLM has this thing called memory, and the LLM is able to understand where you are in the world to make sure that you have a tailored response. So these things are not truly understood in the traditional SEO side. However, fundamentals like on-site optimization are still just as important. Having third-party citations, just as important. Having lists written about you and including you, talking about your programs, etc. All of these things are important. But so are the things that you have on your own website, your brand-owned assets. These things are being cited by the LLMs just as much. And most recently, we've noticed that there's been a rise in citations to youtube.com, reddit.com, and linkedin.com. So when we think about distribution, it becomes more and more important than ever before. Folks, I had a blast today. Thank you so much for the time. We're going to open it up to Q&A so you can dive in deeper and ask us any questions, but I'm looking forward to this. Volt, Zach, over to you.
All right. Thank you both. Yeah, we got some great questions in the chat here. So I'll kick it off. This first one, I believe it was asked during the AI for hyper-personalization section, Volt, where you're discussing psychographic segments and then using AI to adapt a story to align with the values. So the question was, can you give an example of how this type of psychographic persona would match to emissions marketing?
Sure, absolutely. So, and I can give you far more complex examples offline, but just for the sake of talking about it in our webinar, let's say you are doing an email campaign, and the topic of the email is student life. Now, let's say you have three different types of psychographics. You've got, say, the overachiever, who is really taking a look at what they can get involved with in order to build a resume that is going to play really well when they're looking for a job. And then you have another segment in your group that's called Life of the Party. And those people are in it for the experience. They just want to soak up every single last moment of what we have told them is going to be the best time of their lives and the time with which the time that they will hearken to again and again that nothing else will match up to for the rest of their days. And let's say you've got someone who's a really dedicated athlete who is, it's a D1 school, and they know that they are going to be living most of their lives balancing their academics and their practice. When you think about how you're going to craft that email for student life to those three very different psychographic segments, you realize, oh, for the person who's the life of the party, we're going to talk a little bit more about fraternities and sororities or the clubs that you can get involved with. So the person who's an athlete, you're going to be talking about the facilities, the food facilities, the workout facilities. When you're talking to someone who is basically gearing themselves up for a career, then you're going to focus on more of the professional organizations. So that's a very simple example of how understanding your audiences helps you to provide the details that are going to resonate with them. And to be honest with you, for the longest time, I've been doing web work for more than 20 years. And we have talked about personalization again and again and again. And it's always come down to, well, how much content can you actually produce? And so, frankly, I look at the advent of AI and I say, all the aspirations we had for providing personalized experiences and content on websites, in emails, in social, we can actually realize them now because we're able to produce assets at scale without the sort of creative fatigue that comes from trying to take a bunch of information and reframe it for 4 or 5 different audiences and then multiply that by the number of different communications that are happening. So, all right, Zach, back to you.
All right. We've got lots more questions coming in, so we'll get to as many as we can. Here's another one for you. How can I figure out what content is influencing LLMs?
Ross, tag.
I love to jump in on this one. So there's these things called citations that happen. And what you're able to do is you're able to see whether or not the LLMs are citing certain URLs and domains. And what you want to actually do is you want to use a tool like Profound or one of the tools that we talked about today, which allows you to upload a series of prompts that people would use when they are going through that discovery system. And what these tools do are that because with an LLM, it's essentially doing like 10 different queries with different ways of asking the same question over and over again. It's essentially looking at a bunch of different URLs and taking that content, rewriting it, and giving it back to you. So what you need to track is what are the number of times certain URLs are being cited for these prompts, and that gives you the insight into this. So tracking the citations is the key to understanding what content is influencing the LLMs. If you want to understand what content on your site is referencing and influencing the LLMs, then what you actually want to start tracking is how many crawlers the AI bots are crawling your website and how they are doing it. This is where your sitemap comes into play. This is where it becomes very important that you are ensuring that your site is optimized for what you actually want people to hear and see when they are talking to the LLMs. So that is how you would track that, is you're tracking the bots on your own domain. And then on the external sites, you need to use a third-party tool to constantly be monitoring and running these executions in the various platforms, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, Grok, whatever you want to use, to understand how they're scraping the internet.
Awesome. All right, here's another one for you guys. Any tips on getting our editorial teams that are focused on news to shift to a content approach?
That is a really, really wonderful question. I think that asking someone to take a mind, asking someone to shift a mindset it can be really, really hard, right? Because they are trained to do news. But what I find is that sometimes if you're able to work on a project together, that might help and aid the transformation. So I can tell you, for instance, that I did a project with Bowdoin a few years ago. where Bowdoin had an admissions team, a marketing team, a news team, and they all were producing incredible content, but they weren't producing content together. So they were focusing pretty much on their silos. And so we worked on a digital story together that brought all of the teams together and allowed them to figure out, all right, how do we take news and turn it into a narrative? And then how do we take all of the best tools we have in this age of digital storytelling, photography, video, listicles, animated infographics, and bring them all together into a story that, like Ross was talking about a little earlier, we could just maximize the heck out of, right? So we took that story and we teased it on social, we used it in a number of different electronic publications, we atomized that content. So a single picture and a quote could stand up as a miniature story in and of itself. And that sort of approach I have found has worked for a number of institutions in breaking down silos, helping people to work together, and then taking a bit of a mind shift from here are the facts and just the facts to how do I create a narrative that is going to resonate with someone at an emotional level?
Yeah, I think that's a great call out, Volts. I think that's the key. And the other piece would be really, folks, like encourage your writing team to go to webinars and sessions just like this. Like you need to really help them see the outcomes of thinking about content and storytelling in these ways as well, so they can really understand that it's not just you saying it for the sake of saying it. It's for the better of everyone. It's a need for the organization, and speak in the simple language of ROI and business outcomes and organizational outcomes, and hopefully they jump on board.
Yeah, and Emma, to your question in the chat about reporters wanting bite-sized quick reads, I mean, it's not one or the other as far
Right.
as I'm concerned. I mean, one of the things that I love about this age is that, before I got my start in print, and so we would write that 1,500 word article, that 2,500 word article, and that was the focus. And what we find now in this digital age is that, as we talked about, we are taking atomic pieces of information and we combined those pieces of information to ladder up to a larger narrative. So in this world, a reporter can have a bite-sized, quick read article, which
Yep.
could also be a carousel on Instagram, which could also be a clip on YouTube, which could also be an article or a profile in an alumni newsletter, and also be a digital story on your website. And I think that what Ross and I are both pushing for is this sort of intentional approach to content development where you realize at the very beginning all the different ways that you want to or could use that content. And you plan on that together
Yep.
rather than finding out that, oh, alumni relations has interviewed this alum who's just like made $25,000 million here. And yeah, and then there's another team in development that's interviewing this person as well. And then the college is contacting them to include them in the newsletter. And there are all these efforts that are happening across the institution that are all siloed. And if you're able to find ways to work together, then you can take content and really use it well. Because let's be honest, content is hard. Content is hard to produce. So if you're going to produce it, you want to get as much out of that content for as long as possible.
I love that. Nailed it 100%. I agree. Zach, what's next?
All right, here's another one for you. Could you go into more detail about understanding how prospective students are using LLM and how you should be tailoring content to what prospective students are searching for in AI?
Yeah, I can speak to this one a little bit. So, when you are thinking about the prospective student, put yourself in their shoes. Just like if you wanted to be Oprah, put yourself in their shoes and ask yourself, what are the things that they would say to an LLM? They might say something like, what is the best school on the Northeast? What is the best school in the Northwest? They might even go a little bit further and say, I want to become a X, Y, and Z. What is the best program for someone who wants to be that? Now ask yourself, what content on your website actually speaks to those questions with the exact word match? And if they don't exist, then you will not exist either, unless someone else has created that content for you on their domain. And you may have gone down that path. You might have great partners in the media and the press, and they're writing these listicles and things like that, talking about you as being great in this piece. But if you do not have these assets on your site, if you don't have those stories, you're going to have a hard time. But remember what I talked about earlier as well, that it's not just about what lives on your domain. It's also about what's showing up on Reddit. It's also what's showing up on YouTube. It might also be what's showing up on a random site where an alumni wrote a great piece about you, but it's ranking on the first page of Google or in the LLMs. All of these things influence it. So you have to put yourself in their shoes first and do research. And there are different ways that you can do research. Like you can do keyword research, you can do prompt research. You could also like literally talk to customers and students and say, what type of things would you ask? And just learn from them and then use that qualitative insight to then get back, support it with quantitative insight. And someone asked in the chat, like Ross, what was that algorithm you went through to talk about the ROI of stores? What you want to do is understand the volume, which you can track today. Everyone can track this and see the number of people who are going to Bing, going to Google, and asking for the top Northeast college or whatever it might be. If you have that data, folks, you can assume that those types of searches are happening within the LLMs as well. We can't track how many people are going to ChatGPT and searching for certain things. That's not possible today. But you can infer based off of that data that if ChatGPT has a 0.5% market share of search, that 0.5% of that total number is going to also be using the LLMs to find you, and then you reverse backwards. I can get really geeky, so I'm sorry if I'm geeking out too much on this stuff for you folks, but that's the methodology that you should apply.
All right. I think we have time for maybe one more question here. So let's go with this one. What are some tips for using agents or custom GPTs to help repurpose and retarget content?
Ooh, that's a fun one.
That
I think
is. Ross, you start.
I'll start. I'd say this. You can have so much fun with custom GPTs. You do have to be careful. You do want to make sure that folks, you're not doing all of this stuff on free accounts. I think you have to use the pro accounts so your privacy is set and you're locked in and you're making sure that you have all of those things taken care of. That's my first tip. The second tip, I'm going to give two, and I'm going to be short and sweet because we're getting close to time. One, upload your brand guidelines, upload your tone, upload all of those things, and then ask the LLM to be able to take assets that you upload and turn them into other things. That would be another piece of advice that I would use. There are tools that help with this. You can use tools like distribution.ai. You can use Canva, to Volt's point earlier. All of these tools can help a lot. My second piece of advice, which has nothing to do with this, I made a GPT for a coloring book for my kids, and I just upload pictures and I say, turn it into a coloring book with them and tell its stories. And it creates all of these cool coloring books of me and my kids doing stuff. Pro tip for any parents on the call, do it. It's unreal. It's very fun, and they will be lost in the magic of that. All right, well, let's get back to business.
No, it's absolutely awesome. And I would just downstroke again on what you're saying when you train the you train, I use Gemini. And so I have
Love it.
times where I
Smart.
have produced it, like I've given it a dossier, my entire personality. I've given it writing samples. I've uploaded all of those seminal documents and then made sure that it has a really great library to pull from. And that way you can get some really great permutations on the content that you create. So Ross and I want to leave you with a punchline.
Mm-hmm.
Play this. A great story without distribution is a secret. Great distribution without a story is just noise. The future belongs to those who master the art of both, scaled by intelligence. Y'all, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We've got a resources slide in case you want to dive deeper. And as Zach said, we will be sharing this deck with you as well as the recording. And please stay tuned if you enjoyed this webinar. Stay tuned for the next webinar that Ross and I are doing together, and we will promise you some bright shirts for that experience as well.
Love it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Volt. Thank you, Ross. Thank you all for joining, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next Carnegie event. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Cheers.